Oh, wait, Kathleen, I think you're muted. Okay. Let's see. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. Kathleen, are we ready to go? Okay. Let's see. I can't tell if we're having technical issues or not, because I can't. Okay, great. Well, if you guys can hear me and can see the opening slide, we're good? All right, well then I'm just gonna dive right in then. Oh, I saw another chat. Okay, let's just get this going. I don't know, it's technology. It's always a blast. Okay, so let me try to minimize this. All right, so when we start out, the theory that we're working from is that everything in man is reflected in nature. Everything in nature is reflected in man. And with that in mind, we're discussing like how bees and honey mirror mitochondria and exclusion zone water. And also like the different types of mitochondrial dysfunction we're seeing in humans right now might also be mirrored in the type of bee dysfunction that we're seeing with conventional beekeeping. And that ranges from mite infestations to colony collapse disorders. And the paradigm shift here is to look at it more as being in relationship with nature, as opposed to kind of using nature as a means to an end. So one thing that really resonated with me that someone had said recently is that when you're looking at nature, nature is also looking back at you. So it's more to just realize that this relationship is more than just kind of like a controlling or a codependent one, but one in which we're in unity. So the theory that I'm working from is that each hive is a cell and each bee within that hive is a mitochondria. Jacqueline Freeman, in her wonderful book, The Song of Increase, talks about the hive as a beacon of light, and each hive and each bee is wrapped in light. At the same time, each of our cells happens to emit UV light, so there might be another connection there that might be worth exploring. When we're talking about Apis mellifera, which is the European honeybee, or the honeybee that originated in the Mediterranean area, each hive has between 30 to 50,000 bees. 2/3 of those are the female worker bees. And you do have the one female who's the queen, or the mother bee. She's the mother to everybody. The drones are the keeper of memory. Those are the male bees that are more of a sensory organ of the hive as well. And then you have the worker bees, which are maidens who they actually go out. They have a number of jobs, but they're the ones that you see foraging for nectar and pollen in like your garden. Those are the older maiden bees, and that's like their final task before they finally die. Their behavior, though, as a whole, is a complete commitment to the hive. Everything is about the hive. It's not about the individual at all. It's not so much either about who's controlling what. It's very much like the hive itself is the organism as opposed to each individual bee. So they think of unity in a way that human beings, ego aside, we don't really think of ourselves as a whole or in unity. It's more individual pursuits. When it comes to what each bee does within the hive and their role within that family, it's very much about what's greater for everybody as opposed to just themselves. And that leads to their unified thought as well. At the same time that they have this unity going on within the actual hive, they're also in an active partnership with flowers, trees, minerals, water, and light. And I remember when I was in grade school and we were given like little bees on toothpicks to go pollinate our pea sprouts we were growing. It was all about pollination as an act of fertilization for the plant. Looking back now, it's like that's kind of traumatic, because when you watch a bee actually gathering nectar and rolling around in pollen, it's such a beautiful, joyful act, as opposed to a dead bee on a stick just bouncing around. But I guess we all have to learn about how pollination works somehow. And that brings us to the spiritual purpose, that bees also carry memory of the landscape and they enliven the ether. So they are messengers of light, but they are very much creatures of the air. So their hum itself has a vibration that is an activating force. And it goes more into a spiritual purpose as opposed to just a material one. So when we get into the basics of bees, and let me just check in real quick that everybody's good. Like thumbs up, everybody can hear, see. All right, awesome. All right. So there's a couple of things when we get into bees. So we'll start with foraging. Oh, I see something in the chat. Okay, yes, absolutely. Vibration is pure prayer, definitely. So when we get into foraging, this is the time when the bees are making love to the flower. It's a time of an ecstatic state to a degree, but they're very much in a symbiotic relationship with these plants. But it's not so, I feel like when we talk about the scientific aspects of it, it kind of takes out the, not so much emotional, but the relationship that happens between bees and flowers. And it's the older females, like I said, who go out and forage. They collect pollen, nectar, and tree sap, which then they turn into medicines and food for themselves and also for us. They're always seeking out the highest quality ingredients. So like bees are the original Michelin star chefs. Like they want the finest ingredients in their local area. They have an extra sensory, like an extra sense to determine when that plant is at its peak ripeness and when their nectar is ready. They can also tell when a bee has already collected all of the nectar from that plant. They know about what time of day to go forage for it. They know based off of like the scent trails in the air where those flowers are, and the flower is kind of calling them into it. The nectar itself is a combination of glucose and or fructose. That's why some people, they'll say give bees sugar water, but that's giving them energy. It's not giving them nutrition. When they go get nectar and pollen, they're actually getting nourishment from that as well, not just energy. And that brings us into honey production, which is transforming the nectar into what we know as honey. I think that this kind of mirrors the electron transport chain in kind of an interesting way, because it's not one bee goes out and forages nectar and then brings it back and like transforms it into honey. Like I've heard some people say that honey is bee vomit, which doesn't exactly make it appetizing, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I wish I had the icon of the little mitochondria with the different electron transport chain touch points or stations, but you have the forager bee. She comes back to the hive. She has her nectar stored in her honey crop. So they have like two stomachs, even though they're not really stomachs. So the honey crop is just kind of like a pocket or a pouch in her body where she'll store the nectar. And then she has a secondary stomach that actually has enzymes for digestion. But she'll come back to the hive and she'll meet up with another female bee who's a younger female. And she'll take the honey out of her honey crop, which isn't really like vomiting. It's just like a transport. She'll give that honey to another bee, and then she will mix it with some enzymes and in a sense chew it. Like it's an alchemical process that's going on. And this will happen 2 to 4 times where they'll hand it off from bee to bee until they get it into the honeycomb. And by that point, it's starting to get more of the consistency of structured water. And then it's put into a hexagon cell to ripen. Once they put it in that cell, they will unhinge their wings and they'll fan the honey. And this is how they moderate their temperature within the hive, is also with their wings. And that's where the hum comes from, is from this like beating of their wings. But 80% of the water content needs to evaporate before it becomes honey. And then, oh, so sorry, I will slow down. So yeah, slow down. Once it becomes honey, they're going to fan it to evaporate the water content. That water content is kind of like the separation of structured water and bulk water. So there's the evaporation that's going to happen, and that water is going to be moved to a different area of the hive. And we'll get into this in a later slide about propolis. But they basically are giving that nectar the hexagonal shape within that cell, and it forms that structured crystalline consistency. Now, if we go into the basics of bees, each cell within that comb and each cell of honey tells a story. We talk about how light is information. Honey is also the storage of that information. Honey is effectively stored light. At the same time, it is a medicine for both the bees and for us. And depending on what plants that they have foraged, they organize their cells based off of what plant it was at that given time that they foraged and produced honey. So it's almost like their food cabinet, their medicine cabinet. It's a living apothecary that's also a map of the landscape. So when we talk about that compendium of knowledge, it's very complex, even though it seems so simple. And when humans harvest honey, a lot of the times, depending on how the beekeeper is doing this, if it's a bee-centric beekeeper, you'll crush the honeycomb to get the honey out and like put it in a bucket and let gravity do the work. If it's on like a, I don't know, you know, those like rectangular shapes, it's like a preset mold, then it goes into like a centrifuge, and then they get all the honey out. Well, all of that knowledge is then mixed together in a swirl. So we're not eating comb piece by piece or cell by cell. So that information is kind of lost on us because we're missing the subtle aspect of it. But let's see what else we got here. And yeah, the honey does tell the story about how strong our environment is as well. And then weaknesses within the hive, in the wild, they will continuously cull weakness from their ranks, like to control mites and to control different types of problems that might pop up. And conventional beekeeping doesn't really allow for that kind of autonomy. All right, so the parallels between mitochondria and bees, you'll see this list to the left, or my left. those are all the things that mitochondria are sensitive to. And it's also everything that bees happen to be sensitive to as well. And there's another quote by Jacqueline Freeman down here about chemicals, molecular disorder, genetic disruption, atomic disarray. These cause dysfunction within hives, and they ultimately cause hives to collapse. So when we talk about mitochondrial dysfunction and what's going on within our cellular health, it's having a very similar effect. So I think when we look at what's happening with human health, and then we parallel that to what's happening with bee health, we can kind of get a better idea of what the root causes are of this dysfunction, because our mitochondria appear to kind of pair up with bees in terms of what their sensitivities are. As for this diagram at the top, so bees have compound eyes, and they do see in hexagons, but the 3 eyes at the top of their head, they're not really eyes. They're more like light sensors, ocelli, something like that. I can't pronounce anything correctly, but you can see how it's spelled. But these 3 things they use to navigate, because they're flying like this. And so they've got these sensors on the top of their head. So they know where the sun is at any given time. And that's helping them navigate. It's like their Google GPS or something. So they know exactly where the sun is in the sky, what type of UVA light is going on, what time of day it is, where they are in relationship to the sun in connection to the flowers and the landscape. It's all inherently built into their biology. Now, pollen. Pollen is extremely important to bees. It's very high in minerals, and actually a bee will need to eat a lot of pollen to produce things like wax and even honey. They need that protein diet. But they collect it, and you'll see this picture here of this bee who's like completely coated in pollen. So they go to make love to the flower, and they're trying to get the nectar, and the flower has conveniently adapted so that the bee has to get all up in there. And so she'll roll around in the pollen, and it'll coat all these little hairs on her body. And then she'll start cleaning herself and like pushing it down until you get like these little pollen pebbles that you'll see in this little bowl. She'll move all the grains of pollen down to her legs, and then just like attach these little pebbles to her legs, and then she'll fly those back home. And that pollen itself is a major source of food for them. It's field cake or bee bread. And let's see. Oh yeah, absolutely. If you want to eat bee pollen, like, oh shit, I'm going the wrong way. If you want to eat bee pollen, absolutely. It's amazing, especially for people who have fertility issues. You can put it on anything. It's actually a really great supplement. But you'll see a lot of pollen in the store, and this parallels to what's happening with bees. So in conventional beekeeping, they will give bees a certain type of pollen as opposed to letting them forage for it by themselves. And if you'll see about the baby food with the pips, the pollen comes into the hive, and younger female bees will mix it with gut enzymes, and they'll ferment it. So there's also the art of fermentation going on within the hive. And then they feed that to their baby bees, and it gives them beneficial gut bacteria. It gives them the protein that they need, minerals, vitamins, all of that. And it helps the bees become fulfilled in their purpose as a bee. When it comes to human beings eating pollen, you don't want it to be this unified yellow shade. Everything's so uniform. This like pollen comes in so many different colors, and the picture that's in that bowl of pollen, that's more what natural pollen looks like from wild foraging bees, because it's from a diverse diet of different plants and minerals around the landscape. And if someone is like, if a female is having fertility issues, then I would recommend consuming pollen. You have a little bit of pollen, like maybe a small spoonful a day. If incidentally, pollen comes from the male reproductive organ of the flower. And so for men who are having like low sperm counts, then you would definitely want to go with pollen. Let's see. All right. Now we get to the connective tissue and the comb. This is very much like the fascia. again, with me struggling with my speech. But it's basically secreted from the glands of the young maidens from their lower abdomen. It's beneficial for them to actually secrete this wax, which is another reason why preformed wax or plastic comb is actually quite bad for their health, because they need to have that secretion. And I mentioned here that older bees can actually, if they need to, regenerate their glands. And I've talked about this a little before, about how bees can regenerate themselves. So if there is a need in the hive, an older female bee can regenerate herself to a younger time. So like if they need royal jelly, which baby bees are like bathed in this royal jelly, the queen bee only eats royal jelly for the whole of her life. Then a maiden, if they need it, her gland for producing royal jelly could have atrophied. She will regenerate it. If they don't have a queen, then a female bee who's a forager can regenerate and become the fertility aspect of the hive and become like a temporary queen. It's really fascinating how they can literally turn back the clock and restore their body in an anti-aging way. And I think that's why royal jelly is so prominent in like anti-aging circles and different types of bee products, because they do have this magical ability to turn back the clock. But when it comes to our connective tissue and comb, this is an extremely important aspect of the hive. And you'll see in this picture, when it's virgin comb, it's stark white and it has a purity to its scent. Then as it gets a little older, it gets a little bit more amber colored. And then by the time it's really old comb, it gets dark. It can even get black. And if you're a beekeeper, you would want to take like the oldest comb out and make them start making new comb. But this substance, this wax, when it's warm and pliable, it has a very strong vibration to it. And that's how bees know where everybody is in the hive at any given point. It's a sound signature that's happening across the comb. And there's also a scent signature. So Meredith in the podcast talked about how she played with beeswax as a child and the smell of it. Well, that scent is, it holds what's called the queen's substance. That substance for the queen is what keeps the hive in complete harmony. They need to know where their mother is at all times. So they know that based on the vibration on the comb and the smell of the comb. And if something happens, like the queen dies, that substance is lost. And that's when the hive is in disharmony and in like really deep mourning as well. But the other thing to watch out for is that comb does hold on to chemicals. So even if you have treatment-free bees, then you're not using any type of pesticides or chemicals while you're treating or raising your bees. They forage within a 2-mile radius of their hive. So they could be going to a field of industrial ag and they bring back like some sort of neurotoxin. It gets into the comb, it gets into the brood, it kills everybody. So that's the other problem, is that you want to, as the comb gets older, you do want to make them make new comb, just because it does hold on to toxic chemicals. And we see that with, myofascial or myofascial release. You want to like move the energy through the body. You want to make sure that there is regeneration going on and that you're not hoarding on to chemicals from your environment in your tissues. Okay, so now we're into honey. So it is very similar to coherent water in its structure. It's the same consistency. We have that hexagonal shape that coherent water has, in contrast to bulk water. And there is that unity consciousness as well. I mean, I have a working theory that your coherent water is tied to your intuition, because how else would you know something so quickly if it's not through the water in your cells? But there's a couple of different things about honey. If you're going to buy it, the lighter the honey, that's just says that it was foraged in the spring. The darker the honey, it was flowers that were foraged in the fall. Crystallization is natural. And that goes back to Rudolf Steiner's discussion about the hexagonal activating force in the body, that we want to form crystals and we want structured water. Similarly, if you have good raw honey, it will want to crystallize. That doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it's good honey. It's actually a sign that you did a good job. But the honey itself, you want to, if you're doing bee-centric beekeeping, you want to gather honey after the winter, because really that honey is working as insulation from the cold. It's their food that they made all spring and summer. And you can harvest a little bit in the fall, depending on what the honey stores are. But as a general rule, I would say after the winter has passed and they need to start making new comb and forage. But in terms of health and structured water, if you listen to the podcast, I mean, one thing that I'm really intrigued to know is if eating honey and having that hexagonal activation force within the body actually helps or can help someone generate more structured water or deal with a bulk water problem. So there's some interesting parallels there between the two. Now, propolis, this is a tree resin that the bees forage for, so it's medicinal. Resin on a tree is how a tree heals its wounds. So it'll, like, pine resin is like the tears of a pine tree after it's been wounded. So the bees gather the same resin and they make their own medicine with it. Propolis is extremely medicinal for human beings as well. And we can talk about that a little later if you guys want, but it is the immune system medicine of the hive. And I do think that it has a lot in common with a bulk water management system. So they do use their propolis to direct water flow throughout the hive. So remember, when they're putting honey into the cell and they're evaporating the water content, that condensation and evaporation has to go somewhere. So it's propolis that's dividing the structured water of the honey with away from the bulk water that they don't want. But bees also drink water, so they will store that bulk water in a specific area in the hive. And then the comb itself is very much the divider between those two spheres of water. So that's another interesting aspect. And the propolis itself does stabilize the wax as well to make that barrier between the structure and the unstructured. Bee venom, I think, is something that a lot of people are getting more and more interested in these days because it's been so beneficial in treating people with Lyme disease, MS, PTSD even. But what's curious when we talk about it from a quantum perspective is that we have this super highway going on through the body, and you might have scar tissue that blocks that communication system. When you get stung by a bee, it reactivates that communication system. So it can ultimately kind of blast the scar tissue back into aliveness. So if you have stagnation somewhere or inflammation or any type of bottleneck in your communication system of your body, the bees will wake it up. And that's through sting. And there, looking at it from an herbalist perspective, there's a lot to sting that is beneficial. Stinging nettles, even. I know that in Polish folk medicine, if you have arthritis on a joint, like the people would just grab stinging nettles and like slap their joints with it and open up the pathways again and wake it up. And bees are doing that through their sting. Let's see here. Wasp sting is so wasp is considered like a bite. I don't, it's so interesting because someone was saying this the other day. They were asking about yellow jackets, and yellow jacket sting is very different from a bee sting. Bee venom is a medicinal venom. I've never heard of anyone using wasp venom or a wasp bite in like a homeopathic sense, whereas you can get bee venom in a homeopathic dose as well, and that'll treat a lot of different types of inflammation, allergies, I think even asthma it's used for. But I try to avoid getting stung by wasps if possible. Beekeepers, though, they talk about when they get stung by bees that it's they always seem to get stung in a place that's beneficial. So I got carpal tunnel right now on my right wrist from overuse, overexertion. I'm like, would someone please sting me? I think it would be so helpful. But they do seem to find the map in the body where you do need more aliveness and activation. Let's see. But yeah, it also, there's other types of stagnation as well when it comes to depression, grief, circulation problems, emotional distress, I do think that bee venom is helpful there. There's a company called Heal Hive. I don't think it's FDA approved in the United States, but I mean, that might be more reason to give it a go. You know, I won't get into that, but yeah, if like heals like, which in a lot of herbalist circles, that's how we operate. Then if you have inflammation or some sort of stagnation going on, then the inflammation of a bee sting might actually help your body start to heal itself. Now, if we get into conventional beekeeping and what they're doing wrong, and look, I'm not trying to be like, you're a conventional beekeeper, you're the devil. Like that's not it at all. I think, you know, the biggest problem that I think humanity has as in general is just that we're all trying to fight ignorance. And in some ancient cultures, they looked at the realm of earth as the realm of error. So we're here depending on who you're listening to or reading, we're here to make mistakes, and we're here to learn from those mistakes. And we can connect to maybe a higher consciousness, but we're here to learn from mistakes. So I think it's more important to look at what we've done. How are we measuring success? And what can we do differently? And in conventional beekeeping, I think it's pretty obvious that there's a problem, because you've got 40 to 60% of conventionally kept hives that fail every year. And in 2006, when it was very popular talking about colony collapse disorder, and everyone's like, we got to save the bees. Well, again, if you're not getting to the root cause of the problem, you're not going to save the bees. You're just kind of making the situation worse, even though you're very well intentioned. So there's that aspect of, well, we have to have some difficult conversations about, if we are going to disrupt the system for our benefit, do we even know what we're disrupting to begin with? Like, what was the natural cycle that we kind of hijacked because we thought we could do it better? So when we get into conventional beekeeping, we get into hive design. Let's start there. So let me see real quick in the chat. Oh, native flowers for sure. Definitely grow native flowers, and we'll get into that. But when it comes to hive design, right now there's a movement to make the bees' lives easier by giving them plastic comb that's in a set structure. There's an idea that with flow hive, why not just put the honey on tap so you're not disrupting the bees? That causes hive disruption. When you can't form drones or even queens on your own schedule or when you need it because you have a mandated cell size, where you're in basically one size fits all cubicles, that's going to cause psychological distress because they lose their autonomy. Conventional beekeepers don't want them to create propolis because it jams up and gums up the system. So they can't get their honey out very easily because there's this glue holding it in place. So they make sure that bees don't create propolis, which takes away their immune system. And then the bees can't even regulate their own air inside. And hive air is actually extremely medicinal to human beings. And there's some studies going on right now in Germany where people with lung disease are kind of hooked up to a hive with like this oxygen mask kind of thing, and it's healing their lungs. So there's something about, if hives can regulate their own air, it is a medicine all on its own. And if the bees themselves can't regulate their own air, then you're causing sickness. Forced breeding, we have scrambled genetics because they're doing forced and selective breeding of queens. So there's no genetic diversity based on natural genetics for bees. It's very much like artificial insemination, which I saw pictures of that and I was just, who thought of this? They've been watching too many sci-fi films, but it's compromising the queen's fertility. They're killing all the male bees because they want the honey. And so what's their natural genetic practice has been completely disrupted. So then we have sugar feeding. If it's only about the honey and that's how you're measuring success is your honey production, you're taking all of their food, which has their medicine in it, and then you're giving them sugar syrup, or worse, high fructose corn syrup. You're giving them a certain type of pollen that doesn't have the necessary like nutritional diversity. Then their gut bacteria is destroyed by the selective breeding and by their environment. So then when they make these enzymes for their babies, they have weakened gut health and weakened overall health. It definitely affects their longevity. So the bees are dying way faster than they should be. Monoculture and industrial ag is another problem, especially the almond industry. I'm not trying to pick on the almond industry. I mean, I'm sure there's other industries that are doing this. It's just almonds that you hear about the most. But if you had to eat almonds every day for an extended period of time and you couldn't take any medicine, or you had no gut, your gut health was trash, and you didn't have any diversity in your diet whatsoever, it's just you only get almonds, like, you're going to get sick. And it also takes them away from minerals. They're not getting the mineral content that they need, so they're not being able to function as electric beings. Let's see. Yeah, and then to go to the top up here, all of this psychological stress, when we talk about how stress creates worsened health outcomes for humans, I mean, it's the exact same for bees. It definitely weakens their immune system further. And then when they get a mite infestation, they can't fight it off. So you have colony collapse. So bee-centric beekeeping is putting the bee first, going back to the ancient tradition of having reverence for the bees, that the hive is a holy, healing place. You have respect and gratitude, and you build a relationship with them. You go out and talk, like beekeepers will go talk to their bees. There's a tradition in European folklore where if someone dies in the household or the beekeeper dies, you go and tell the bees. The bees need to know what's going on. If a birth happens, you go tell the bees. It's like having, it's an extended member of your family to a degree. But the wild bees, or bees that are kept in a bee-centric way, have 40% more active bacteria species in their guts than the conventionally kept bees. They have far more genetic diversity, so they're a lot healthier. They're building on natural comb, kind of as nature intended. So they're getting to have that secretion of wax, and they're getting to build what they want the way that they need it to be, as opposed to a predetermined wax mold or a plastic foundation. And again, those foundations they're sold in the sense that they're going to help your bees be more productive in an industrial sense, but it actually takes away vibration, smell, and communication. So you get confusion instead, and less, they might be producing more honey, but it's not a quality honey in terms of energetic or vibration. Bee-centric beekeepers are also doing everything they can to be chemical free. But again, there are a lot of chemicals in our daily environment. Even we have to deal with that and try to cope with microplastics and different chemicals in the air and in the ground and soil and water. Bees are dealing with the exact same thing. I mean, I don't think bees want to drink tap water any more than we do. And then finally, we have our non-native EMFs, which if you have read The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, you'll see that there's a direct correlation between the rise of electricity and electromagnetic radiation and the disappearing of the bees. They are very much, I would say, tied into the magnetism of the earth and the electromagnetic frequencies of everything. And so when you start putting up Wi-Fi routers or Bluetooth or whatever, it's going to confuse them and fry the system. Let's see how we're doing on time. All right, so minerals, and I don't want to speed through this too much, but we've talked a little bit already about how important minerals are, but they help minerals migrate across the landscape, and they do help with soil health as well. So if you want good soil, you also need bees as part of your team to make that happen. They do hold libraries of honey and pollen, and it tells the story of the landscape and geological shifts in your area. So they're, actively informing their new brood and their pips about where they live, what's their food. They're teaching you what flavors you need to go looking for. Where is this? At what time of day do you go forage for it? It's very much that they are informing their young of what it means to be a honeybee and what their role is on a larger scale. In terms of plants, they only want healthy plants. So your healthiest plants are probably going to be your native plants, because they are the most geared towards living in your native soil and your environment. Oh yeah, borage is awesome. But be careful where you plant borage, because it will take over. Okay, so what can we learn? Fertility. I know that in terms of fertility purposes, a lot of human beings right now are having fertility problems. We've already touched on pollen, but sunlight is extremely important. A queen bee lives her life in darkness, And it's that sun exposure she gets when she goes out in a swarm that regenerates her fertility and her reproductive ability. And this is a bee that is laying 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day. So she really needs that reproductive force that she's getting from a flight that maybe happens once a year in the sunlight, and it will completely regenerate her fertility. So again, if someone is having issues with fertility, they probably need to get outside. In terms of ecstasy and joy, which I went into this much more on the podcast, and I know we're kind of getting short on time here, but there is a joy and interconnectedness and happiness that the bees represent and possess, and this excited energy. And that's the energy that you want to consume with your bee products. You don't want to be consuming sorrow and confusion and sadness, like in a conventionally kept beehive. That's more of the energy that you're going to get. You're not going to get that ecstatic state that might help you form more structured water. And then the bees teach us how to be in better relationship with the earth. And there's a quote here from Braiding Sweetgrass about that relationship. It's not a one-way street. It's not about controlling nature or making nature, heal you. It's more about seeing nature and letting nature see you, and having that type of intimacy that the bee has with the landscape. So supporting the bees, we've talked about native flowers. They like purple, violet, blue, yellow, and white. It's their jam. Borage flowers, bees love bright blue. Borage makes beautiful medicine, especially if you've got like a weakened endocrine system or you're frazzled and you need like some stamina and fortitude. Borage is really good for that. Water, you want to make sure they don't drown. So if you have like a shaded bird bath, put like some crystal stones or moss. You can get really creative with that. Try to stop using Roundup. What I tell everyone is it kills your collagen. So, if you want to be beautiful, stop using Roundup. And then, heal yourself as you heal the bees. You can sit with them while you ground. I mean, I'll sit in my garden and just kind of watch the bees work and just hang out with them. And that's always very beneficial for me psychologically. But yeah, so there we go. I mean, we can take some questions. I know that was kind of like a fly through of that. But if anyone wants me to kind of track back on anything.
Wow.
Yeah, I can probably.
So amazing. That really, really, really was amazing. Amber, great job. Yeah, any questions? Anybody wants to hop on? Mawish.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love the spiritual aspect of this presentation is sublime, and I'm like jumping up and down. Love everything about it. How did you get into this, Amber? Like, what made you get all the bees to begin with?
Well, I mean, the podcast is probably the better representation of my CV, but I started writing an epic poem about 10 years ago, and I wanted it to be about nature. And I came across Ariella Daly's work. And if you're interested in the spiritual aspect of bees, I would highly recommend her work. It's her website is Honeybee Wild. And on Instagram, she's Beekeeping in Skirts. And she's fantastic, a wealth of knowledge about the mysticism and spiritual aspects of bees, as well as bee-centric beekeeping, and also apitherapy, which is healing through bees. Yeah, I would say that she's the best resource for you if that's your jam.
Amazing. And my other question is, as a cancer survivor, what are your thoughts on the healing powers of, all of these things that you mentioned for healing from cancer?
Healing from cancer, it gets a little complicated. Cancer is like one of my, I don't want to say it's my favorite subject, but because that comes across as wrong. But propolis, sorry, I was just checking to make sure. I would go with propolis, and you can smell propolis, and it's way over there. I don't want to make a run for it, but you can get like a little ball of propolis and keep it in a jar, and you can just open the jar and smell that, and you get like an immune boost and the energy of like healing from the hive. Propolis and tincture is usually 1 part propolis to 3 parts alcohol. So you can go to your local farmer's market and get a propolis from your area and put it in alcohol for about 2 weeks and just shake it every day. And you can do 3 drops 1 to 3 times a day to boost your overall health using bee medicine.
Amazing. I'm going tomorrow.
Great. Let's see. Tim had a question about the deuterium content of honey. And I don't know much about deuterium within honey itself, so I'm not going to be able to comment much on that. That's an interesting question though. You could mix it with some Gerolsteiner or something. Like, try to make it balanced. Let's see. Anybody else? All right. Well,
for me, the amazement was the parallel on the humans and the bees, just the whole structured water, the fascia, all of it, and then the plight of the bee with the non-native affecting it, and just it's so amazing that they're kind of our mirror. And so many people have been saying, look to the bees for how humanity's doing. And so true. And then the plastic combs, I mean,
it's not that like people who have bought a flow hive are bad people. Like,
no.
A friend of mine is a beekeeper, and her brother bought a flow hive, and she's like, should I tell him? It's like, I mean, you tell him. I'm not telling him.
Yeah, it's like getting gifts of warm, hot food in a plastic container,
Yeah.
The people aren't bad. They just gifted you that. They just don't know.
Well, and look, I've worked in marketing as a ghostwriter, selling products off and on for like 15 years. So, I mean, you can say anything to sell a product, really. And the position that they've taken is it's less intrusive to the hive to have honey on tap. And that may or may not be true. But how are you defining intrusion? How are you defining disruption? There's a more subtle disruption going on that if you've never raised bees before, and they market it a lot to first-time beekeepers, that you're actually helping the bees. And so they have this feel-good energy about it. Like, oh, I'm doing the right thing. Like I'm not disrupting them. And it's like, actually, I'm sorry. But here's the list of all the reasons why that might not be the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it
India?
India? Okay.
Yes, Amber. I could not get in at the beginning, and I missed like half of this. Do you mind sharing your slides?
I mean, I'm happy to send my slides over to Kathleen if they want to put them somewhere with the presentation. Like, totally fine. Yeah, I think it was more, we were just doing like an overview of kind of this theory that it's a mirroring aspect between nature and ourselves. But yeah, I'm totally fine with sharing the slides. And then I think a recording of this will be available, right?
It should be available tomorrow up on the platform, the QBC platform.
Oh, that's so great. And then I'm very curious on your comment that you're curious on, and if having or eating honey would increase easy water. So I jumped on your website, sign up for your emails. And so when you figure out that answer,
I know if anyone wants to do like some experiments, but I mean, I'm also like, how do you measure that? I mean, if someone has really bad edema, then we know that they have an excess of bulk water. So then you could try to give them honey and see if the edema resolves itself. But even in the practice of herbalism, most people will just use propolis. That's what they know of more as being medicinal. But even sitting, Chad was saying he visits a beehive during his daily walks. And it's like, even just being by the hive and the vibration of the hive is in fact medicinal, and it helps your nervous system. So there's something beautiful about that. And even with beekeepers, there's a, I say it's a rumor. I don't know. It's like beekeepers live longer than most people. I have no evidence to support that. I'm not collecting death certificates of beekeepers, but But it's just kind of like a running rumor that beekeepers live a really long time because they're by this medicinal vibration. So, and there's a lot of different ways that you can work with bee products. I mean, even just getting honey, honey's great for burns. Like if someone has a burn, you can put honey on it. It's way better than Neosporin. I use it. My nieces and nephews are constantly getting into thickets and everything. So it's like, okay, we're putting some honey on it. But then now my nephew's like, yummy honey, and he always wants to eat it. I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing here.
Too funny.
But so, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects of it. I mean, I think we talked about propolis. Propolis is even good for skin disorders. Just gonna flip through some notes real quick. I mean, you can take bee pollen and ground it up and put it in like a honey paste. And that has some signs that it helps with histamine issues and mast cell disorder. So that's something I think Carrie said she was going to be here today, but I'm like, Carrie, we got to work on histamine problems with some honey. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can work for or work with. And even royal jelly, even though it's kind of harvested in a kind of a brutal way, it does help people with like intellect, it's neuroprotective, it helps increase endurance, stamina. I mean, there's a lot of products that come out of the hive that you'd be surprised how beneficial they are. And you can get most of them now at the grocery store. But, you know,
Yeah, Amber, how would you vet even like a humane, good, what you would call a good beekeeper to get your products from locally?
Yeah. So if it's pure honey, they'll say it's pure honey. They have heat treated it and pasteurized it. So you don't want that. When you're making tea with honey, make sure that your tea is something that you can actually drink, like it doesn't burn your tongue, because the hot water will change the molecular structure of the honey. So you just want to, you want it to be drinkable at that point, then add your honey. Don't add your honey, then put boiling water on top. And sometimes I even forget this and I'm like, oh shit. But, you want raw honey. I think that the market is kind of catching up with people wanting raw honey, especially Manuka honey, which supposedly has all these crazy health benefits. And I mean, I can't say either way if Manuka honey from like New Zealand is especially unique in that. But I tend to go for farmers markets and finding people who are extremely passionate about their bees. And you can just kind of tell the energy radiating off of them. That's probably the energy that the bees will have as well. So that's kind of how I gauge it. But if you really wanted to order something and local honey wasn't necessarily the priority, oh yeah, you want something that's in the sun that you're in. So, I mean, that's pretty much a quantum principle at this point. But I love Benjamin Pixie of Pixie Mead. He's like this weird little medieval gypsy, like who's just like living his life with the bees and his family, and they make mead and all kinds of bee medicine. And he makes absolutely beautiful medicine. And he makes this honey moonshine that I make medicine with. And it's strong, but it's really good. So, but he has so much respect for the bees and their natural processes that I'll get stuff from him, even though he's all the way on the West Coast. Louisiana, we have a lot of ties to Napoleon and France. So there's bees everywhere, like bee symbolism. But in terms of our beekeepers, I think we're, Louisiana, hold tight on Louisiana for the next 8 years. I think we're on the verge of a major revival, but if I have any say in it, we will be getting more towards bee-centric stuff and more, our bees here hopefully will be making products that other people are going to be coveting. So that's my goal.
Do we have a really great farmers market here? And there's 3 or 4 pretty robust beekeepers that come. I just wondered if there's, would it be offensive to a beekeeper to ask them about their, do they use the plastic cones or, I mean, I don't want to alienate them or offend them, but I'd kind of like to know.
I mean, I'm so non-confrontational, but I'd be like, hey, how are you raising these bees?
Okay, there you go. That's what I need. Yeah. How you raising the bees?
I mean, I like visiting beekeepers to see what they're up to. I mean, I don't really, this is the first time I've ever broadcasted. I'm like the bee lady. But so, I mean, I'll just go to people's farms. I'm like, hey, what's going on? But I have found some really magical people who care about their bees. They want to make sure that it's bee-centric, and they're not necessarily, you know, I think people who are into regenerative agriculture and organic farming, they tend to be more in line with a bee-centric viewpoint. So if that's what they're doing, like my friend who has Bayou Sarah Farm, she raises water buffalo in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and she has honeybees, and I think she's doing a great job. And those aren't necessarily, she's not going out in a skirt and doing like some sort of ritual with her bees or anything. Like, like she's not dancing around like a Melissa, but her bees are very happy and very healthy. And I think that she's got a quality product, even though it's not necessarily marketed as a bee-centric product. So that's a tricky situation. But yeah, Andy, if you got pixie meat in your state, like you're very lucky. He's awesome.
Amber, is what you were just talking about called propamel? Is that what you said?
Propamel, I think that's an oxymel with propolis. So you can take propolis and you can mix it in an oxymel of honey and vinegar. And so you can make a bunch of different types of medicine with bee stuff. So that would be more, I've made tinctures with pollen where you just put alcohol and let it break down in there and you just do drops. I've made oxymels with it. You can infuse honeys with just about anything. On the podcast, I talked about electuaries, which are a honey paste. So it's 1 cup raw honey to 6 teaspoons of an herbal powder. And one thing I forgot to say on the podcast is you want to sift it in, because sometimes you'll get like clumps of things that aren't necessarily a powder. But I have a friend of mine who's got a structured water problem. And so, and he's got inflammation, and we really want to build up his structured water. So we've been working with a honey paste with turmeric, ginger, cardamom. It's basically like a golden milk blend that I made. And it's just 6 teaspoons of that mixed in the honey, and he loves it. And I mean, he looks so much better. Like even people are complimenting him that he looks great. They're like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm eating honey. Like,
so does he just eat like a teaspoon, a quarter teaspoon?
Yeah,
You put it in hot water or
a
warm
teaspoon
water?
to a tablespoon a day. You can eat it straight. Usually, I make this one electuary called Yaya Brew, and it kind of tastes like Nesquik. And so I'll lightly warm some raw milk, and then I'll put like a tablespoon of Yaya Brew in there. And it's got like faux tea powder and all kinds of like female herbs in there. I'll have to get the list. I can like post it on something. But and it tastes like freaking Nesquik, and it's delicious. So I mean, you can make like medicinal hot chocolates with your honey powder or honey paste as well. You just don't want to boil it.
Do you have this stuff on your website?
I know that on my email series on the referrals, I have recipes for electuaries as like one of the goodies. If you like refer the series to people, there's like a self-care bath and body stuff. There's one for herbal electuaries and broths. And then there's one that's like a cheat sheet for herbalism, for like which plants for which tissue states. But, I can provide the Yaya Brew because it's delicious. So, and I have a male version, which was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, but the person I made it for thought I named it Gading Dong paste for some reason, and the name just stuck. So, I will give you guys the recipe for those. I was like, I did not name it that, but we're gonna go with it.
So Amber, how do we find you? As we're wrapping up here, how do we find you and get more from you, more about you?
So it's amberhargroder.com, and I'll just like put that in the chat, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be great.
My last name, I swear. To me, it's not that hard, but for some reason it's like
it's easier than Horstmeyer, just saying.
It's like a Americanized German, so it's I don't know. But the rest of my bloodline's French. It's just the tail end is German, so it's kind of a mix. But yeah, so you can find me there, and then I'm on Instagram. Oh shit. I've been cursing so much on this, sorry. Okay, and then I'm on Instagram at Amber Hargroder. Oh, well, yeah. And I'm trying to get better with video content, and usually I'm in a rush, and so I'm just like, we're just gonna do it this way. And a friend of mine was like, no, you can't do it that way. So I have a bunch of recipes that I've been filming content, and we're gonna put it on there soonish. I mean, everything's always in flux. So, but I do have a bunch of herbal blends on Instagram right now if you were interested in specific herbal remedies, but I could do a series of electuary recipes. That way you guys have them.
And do you have clients? Do you see clients or?
Yeah, so I have an herbal practice right now, and so I do see clients. I'm just now integrating more quantum biology principles into that and incorporating more sauna, red light. Grounding has been amazing. I had a client with sciatica that burdock root was helping, but it wasn't until he started grounding a lot that it really started to help. And I think that the quantum principles really help herbalism work better, because herbalism is a holistic healing modality. And I really do think that it's kind of catching a ride on that super highway of easy water, because the way that herbs work is through energetics. And so they are expressing information to the body that I think the water is changing its crystallized shape, or its crystals, in response to. That's my working assumption. So right now I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around how these two kind of marry each other. And I just started another herbalism program that's kind of like a master's program. It's like, how did they treat with herbs in ancient Egypt? And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Let's see what that was about. So
We've got to talk. Yeah.
yeah. So
yeah.
now I'm like, I'm spelunking in the ancient world even more with how they actually treated people with plants. But what's interesting is we were doing like a meet and greet, and I was like, well, I'm a water nerd and I really love structured water. And like all these people came out of the wood. I'm a water nerd too. I was like, oh my God, I found my people. Like,
Nice.
so
Well, you really are the Renaissance woman. It's amazing. And I so appreciate your presentation, and you're just a gift to us all. And thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. And I mean, just that word gets thrown around a lot. I do think we've been in kind of a dark age, even though we didn't notice really. We're coming out of it. So everybody on this call today can choose to be part of a Renaissance. Like everybody is a pollinator in their own right, and you're bringing your information to the table to spread out across the landscape. And that's going to help more people kind of get out of the dark age and more into this like great era that we might be entering in right now in terms of health and longevity. So good job, everyone.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yes,
All
thank you very much.
Yeah, y'all have a good day. Bye.